I'm a product photographer. I make coffee mugs look like they have ambition. I make cheese sandwiches look like they went to private school. It's a real career once you understand the business side. But in my husband's world, photography was treated like a cute detour before I figured out what I wanted to do for real. My husband, Michael, had just made partner at his law firm, Whitmore and Associates, a milestone, a career summit. And despite everything, I was proud of him. I'd been the one staying up late while he rehearsed arguments, ordering takeout at midnight when he was drowning in case files, reminding him, constantly, that he deserved more than what he was being offered. I thought we were a team. The celebration was hosted at one of those venues that quietly tells you you're poor without saying it out loud. Chandeliers that cost more than my car. Appetizers so small they felt like punctuation marks. Men in black suits who all looked like they'd learned to smile in mirrors. I assumed Michael would thank the firm, maybe say something polished about perseverance, maybe, briefly, acknowledge my support. Instead, he cleared his throat. He looked directly at me and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want to introduce you all, he said smoothly into the microphone, to my ex-wife, Julia Thompson. No degree, no real career trajectory, just someone who's been freeloading off my income while taking pictures of sandwiches. Ex-wife. That was the first time I'd heard it. The room inhaled like it had just watched a slow-motion crash. His parents, Gerald and Patricia, laughed. Not politely, not awkwardly. They laughed like I was entertainment they'd paid to see. I felt every eye land on me, waiting to crumble, to cry, to explode. Here's the thing about public humiliation. You get one moment where the world decides who you are next. And in that moment, I decided something, quietly, firmly, and forever. This would be the last time any of them ever saw me small. Before that night, if you'd asked me who I was, I would have answered with something simple. I'm Julia Thompson. I'm a product photographer. I'm the kind of woman who can make a plain ceramic mug look like it belongs in a luxury catalog, just by shifting the light 2 inches to the left. I'm also the kind of woman who used to believe that if you loved someone enough, you could outwork their doubts about you. Michael and I met in a way that felt almost cliché, except it didn't feel cliché at the time. I was photographing a small campaign for a local restaurant that was rebranding. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was proud of it. The owner trusted me, the shots were good, the lighting was clean, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is what I'm meant to do. Michael walked in halfway through the shoot, wearing a suit that looked too expensive for lunch and a phone pressed to his ear like he was negotiating peace treaties. He paused when he saw me crouched on the floor, adjusting a reflector, then, without meaning to, stepped right into my setup and blocked the light. Careful, I said, sharper than I meant to. He glanced down, surprised, then smiled like he wasn't used to being corrected. My fault, he said. I didn't realize there was a whole production happening. There is, I replied, still focused, and you're currently ruining it. That made him laugh. Not an offended laugh, a real one. And when the shoot ended, he stayed. Asked about the camera. Asked about the business. Asked questions like someone genuinely curious, not like someone collecting trivia. He was charming in a quiet way, polished but not loud, confident without trying too hard. He told me he was an associate at Whitmore and Associates, and I remember thinking, of course you are. He had that energy, like the world had always made room for him. We started dating a week later. At first, it was easy. Michael liked structure. I liked freedom. He planned, I adapted. He lived in crisp schedules and neat wins, and I lived in creative chaos and long nights of editing. It felt balanced, like we were teaching each other something. When he talked about his future, it sounded certain. Partner track, big cases, prestige. When I talked about mine, it sounded more fluid. Clients, growth, referrals, building a name. But I was building something real, even if it didn't come with a corner office. And for the first year, he respected it. Or at least, he acted like he did. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It happened in comments that were easy to excuse. "Oh, that's cute," he'd say when I told him about a shoot. "You got to take pictures of candles today." He'd say cute the way someone talks about a child showing them a drawing. Or he'd say, "Must be nice to work whenever you feel inspired," after he'd had a 12-hour day at the firm. I'd respond the same way every time. Calm, patient, explaining. "No," I'd tell him, "freelancing doesn't mean free. It means I'm responsible for everything. Marketing, contracts, invoices, scheduling, edits, delivery. I don't clock out." He would nod. He would kiss my forehead. And I'd think, okay, he gets it. But then we got married. And suddenly his world became our world. The expectations shifted quietly, like furniture rearranged while you were sleeping. His parents, Gerald and Patricia Morrison, never liked me. They didn't say it outright at first, but it leaked through everything they did. Patricia would ask what I was doing these days, as if my career had an expiration date. Gerald would make little jokes about my art projects and ask Michael when he planned to marry someone serious. Michael never shut it down. Not directly. He'd squeeze my hand under the table sometimes, like that counted as defending me. And I let it, because I loved him, and because I believed love was supposed to include compromise. I also believed that if I kept showing up, kept being supportive, kept proving myself, eventually they'd stop treating me like a phase. I thought I could earn my place. So when Michael started staying late more often, I adjusted. When he came home tense, I softened. When he practiced presentations, I listened. When he panicked about cases, I ordered food and told him he was brilliant. I made our home stable so he could chase stability outside of it. And in my head, that was what marriage was. Two people holding up the same life from different angles. I didn't realize I was the only one holding, because the warning signs were never loud. They were subtle. They were smiles that didn't reach his eyes. They were jokes with sharp edges. They were moments when he looked at me like I was something he'd outgrown. And I kept telling myself the same lie. He's just stressed. This is just the firm. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. It was building. Quietly. Patiently. Like a trap being set while I was still calling it love. And by the time we arrived at that partnership celebration, I honestly believed we were walking into a proud moment. I didn't know I was walking into an ending. Looking back, the shift didn't start with cruelty. It started with distance. Michael didn't stop talking to me. He stopped listening. I'd be mid-sentence, explaining a client brief or a lighting challenge I was excited about, and I'd notice his eyes drift. Not to his phone, not to the TV, but somewhere behind me. Like he was already late for a life I wasn't part of. At first, I adjusted. Again, I shortened my stories. I waited for better timing. I told myself not every detail needed to be shared. Marriage wasn't supposed to be constant validation, right? Adults had separate worlds. But then his world started pushing into mine. His firm events became mandatory. Not, "Would you like to come?" More like, "We should go." And we quickly became me adapting. I bought dresses that fit rooms full of lawyers, learned how to smile politely at people who asked what I did, and then immediately asked Michael something more substantial. I memorized the names of his colleagues' spouses. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Patricia started inviting us to dinners that felt less like meals and more like evaluations. "So, Julia," she'd say, cutting into her food carefully, "have you ever thought about going back to school? Something practical?" Michael would clear his throat. "Mom, it's just a question," she'd reply sweetly. "I worry about long-term stability." Stability. That word became a weapon wrapped in concern. Gerald was subtler, which somehow made it worse. He'd ask Michael about promotions, bonuses, retirement plans, always when I was sitting right there, as if my presence was decorative, as if my future was something Michael alone was responsible for. And Michael, he never corrected them. He never said, "Julia is doing well." He never said, "Her work pays bills too." He never said, "Stop talking about my wife like she's a liability." Instead, he'd say things like, "It's complicated," or her field is different. Different became code for lesser. At home, the jokes started. Light ones at first. Must be nice to sleep in while the rest of us are saving civilization, he'd say on mornings I was editing until 2 a.m. You're really busy for someone who doesn't have a boss, he'd joke, when I turned down last-minute plans because of deadlines. I'd push back gently. That's not fair, I'd say. You know I work hard. I'm kidding, he'd reply. Relax. And I did. Because I didn't want to be the sensitive wife, the insecure one, the one who couldn't take a joke. But something else was happening too. Something quieter. Michael stopped asking me for input. He used to run decisions by me. Career moves, financial choices, even small things like which events mattered and which didn't. Now he'd inform me after the fact. I told the partners you'd handle the photos for the firm retreat, he said one night, like he'd just told me we were out of milk. I froze. You volunteered me? It's exposure, he said. Good exposure. Exposure doesn't pay invoices, I replied. He sighed, already irritated. Why are you making this a thing? It's my firm. That was new. My firm, not our life. Not my wife's business, just his world. And I was orbiting it. The worst part wasn't the comments or the dismissals. It was the way I started doubting myself. I'd open my laptop and second-guess rates I'd charged confidently for years. I'd reread client emails looking for imagined disappointment. I'd feel guilty for taking pride in work that didn't come with titles or applause. I started over-explaining, over-justifying, over-accommodating. And every time I felt that tightness in my chest, the one that whispered, "Something is wrong," I told myself the same thing I'd told myself for months. This is just a phase. He's under pressure. Once he makes partner, things will settle. The partnership celebration was supposed to be that turning point, the finish line, the moment where the pressure lifted and we found each other again. I didn't realize that, to Michael, that night wasn't about arriving together. It was about stepping forward alone. And somewhere between the seating chart, the speeches, and the champagne, I stopped being his wife and became a prop he was ready to discard. I just didn't know it yet. The night of the celebration, I remember noticing how carefully Michael dressed. Not in the usual rushed, distracted way, but deliberately. He adjusted his tie twice, smoothed his jacket, checked his reflection in the mirror longer than necessary. You nervous? I asked, standing behind him, fastening my necklace. He smiled, but it was thin. Just want everything to go smoothly. I didn't realize then that everything didn't include me. The venue buzzed with practiced confidence, laughter that carried just far enough to be heard, handshakes firm, smiles rehearsed. People congratulated Michael, clapped him on the shoulder, told him how well-deserved this was. Some nodded at me politely. Others didn't look at me at all. We were seated near the front. His parents were 2 tables away, already holding court. Patricia caught my eye once, gave a smile that felt more like acknowledgement than warmth. The speeches began. Senior partners talked about long hours, sacrifice, excellence. Michael's name came up again and again, paired with words like brilliant, driven, relentless. I felt proud, truly. I leaned toward him once, squeezed his hand. You did this, I whispered. He didn't squeeze back. Then it was his turn. Michael stood, adjusted the microphone, and scanned the room. He looked comfortable, commanding, like this was where he'd always belonged. I'm honored, he began. This firm has shaped me in ways I never imagined when I first walked through its doors. Polite applause. He thanked mentors, colleagues, his parents, who beamed like this was their graduation too. And then his gaze landed on me. It lingered. Something in my stomach tightened. I think this is also a good time, he said smoothly, to acknowledge the people who've been part of the journey. The pause was deliberate. I want to introduce you all to my ex-wife, Julia Thompson. The word hit before my brain could process it. Ex-wife. Laughter rippled through the room, some sharp, some nervous, some confused. Gerald threw his head back, clapping his knee. Patricia covered her mouth, but her eyes were bright with satisfaction. No degree. The room inhaled. I felt it, every gaze snapping to me like a spotlight. Heat rushed up my neck. My ears rang. For a split second, I thought I might actually pass out, but I didn't. Michael was smiling, waiting for a reaction, for tears, anger, a scene. I realized this was planned. I thought about every late night, every meal ordered, every time I'd made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. And suddenly I felt very calm. I reached for my champagne glass. The movement was slow enough that people noticed. Conversations died. The laughter stopped mid-breath. The room leaned in. I stood, not hurried, not shaking. I raised the glass slightly and met Michael's eyes. "Cheers," I said, my voice clear, even, almost bored. "This is the last time any of you will ever see me." Silence. I took a sip. The champagne tasted sharp and expensive and completely wasted on this room. I set the glass down gently, no slam, no flourish, and turned toward the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The hallway outside was quiet, almost kind. My hands started shaking then, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I pulled out my phone, ordered a ride. 3 minutes away. Perfect. While I waited beneath an absurdly ornate wall sconce, I opened my notes app and started typing. Rules. Don't respond tonight. Not angry, not hurt, not provoked. Pack essentials only. Leave everything else, including the emotional baggage. Do not let anyone convince you this was a joke. Never eat appetizers that look like punctuation again. My ride arrived. The driver didn't ask questions, just nodded, pulled away from the curb, and let the city slide past the window. I caught my reflection in the glass, still dressed for a celebration I was no longer part of. But for the first time in a long time, I looked like myself. The adrenaline didn't wear off all at once. It drained slowly, like a tide pulling back, leaving behind exhaustion so heavy it felt physical. By the time I reached the apartment, my hands were steady again, but my chest ached in that dull, hollow way that comes after something irreversible. The apartment looked exactly the same as I'd left it 3 hours earlier. Too normal. My cat Oliver lifted his head from the couch and blinked at me like I'd interrupted his plans. He stretched, yawned, and flicked his tail, unimpressed by the fact that my marriage had just detonated in public. "Yeah," I murmured, dropping my bag. "I know. You warned me." I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I moved. Motion felt safer than stillness. I pulled my equipment cases from the closet first, because even in shock, I knew what mattered. Cameras before clothes. Proof before comfort. I laid everything out methodically on the floor. My primary camera, the one that had paid for itself 3 times over. The backup body I'd repaired myself after a brutal fall. Each lens wrapped carefully, like they were fragile pieces of a future I refused to abandon. The 50mm, the one that made everything look cinematic. The macro, the one that could turn a strawberry seed into a landscape. The workhorse zoom that had shot everything from engagement rings to craft beer labels. Hard drives next. 4 terabytes of client work. My entire professional existence condensed into something that fit in a padded case. Clothes were easier. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 black tops, 1 button-down for meetings, the charcoal jacket, the one that made me look like I had my life together, even when I didn't. I didn't take anything sentimental. I booked an extended stay hotel 15 minutes away. 2 weeks, pet-friendly, affordable enough that it wouldn't erase my savings. Then I emailed my active clients. Short, professional, calm, a family. True enough. I texted my best friend Marcus, an ER nurse who had 0 tolerance for nonsense and an impressive ability to stay grounded during chaos. Michael called me his ex-wife at his partnership party. Publicly. I left. His response came instantly. "Do you want me?" I laughed. Out loud. The sound surprised me. "Moving out tonight. Hotel for now." "Proud of you," he replied. "Call if you need money, backup, or someone to remind you you're not insane." By midnight, everything I owned that mattered was in my car. I did one last walkthrough, turned off lights, checked corners, closed doors. I didn't look at the bedroom. I didn't need to. The hotel room was clean, generic, and mercifully quiet. I set my bags down, let Oliver out of his carrier, and sat on the edge of the bed for the first time all night. That's when the messages started. Michael first. That was dramatic. You really just left? People are asking questions, Julia. I didn't respond. 20 minutes later. It was a joke. Everyone knew it was a joke. You're being too sensitive. Still nothing. Then, we should talk about this like adults. If you communicated better, this wouldn't escalate. I stared at the screen, equal parts numb and stunned. The audacity was almost impressive. The next message came from his mother, a long one. She framed it like concern, like wisdom, like I was a child who didn't understand how successful people interacted. She suggested I apologize to Michael for disrupting his moment. I read it 3 times, deleted it. Then came an email from Gerald, formal, structured, with an attachment, a spreadsheet, color-coded, titled, Financial Clarity Regarding Julia's Benefit from This Relationship. It itemized my existence. Rent differential, networking dinners, career advice, assigned a dollar value. Wi-Fi troubleshooting, $150. I closed my laptop. Not because I was angry, because I finally understood something. They didn't see me as a partner. They never had. To them, I was an expense line item. That realization didn't shatter me. It clarified me. And somewhere between the hum of the hotel air conditioner and Oliver settling against my leg, I felt it settle in my chest. This wasn't about fixing anything. This was about leaving something that had already been broken, quietly, cleanly, and without apologizing for surviving it. I lay back, stared at the ceiling, and made myself one promise. I would not shrink to make anyone comfortable ever again. Not Michael, not his family, not a room full of people who mistook cruelty for confidence. This wasn't the end. It was the moment I stopped carrying weight that was never mine. The next few days felt like standing in the center of a storm that insisted I'd cause the weather. I didn't reach out to anyone from Michael's world. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. Silence wasn't avoidance, it was containment. I needed to understand what had happened before I let anyone rewrite it for me. They didn't appreciate that. Michael escalated first. His messages shifted from dismissive to strategic. You embarrassed me. My parents are upset. This is affecting my reputation. Not our marriage, not your dignity, just optics. When that didn't work, he changed tactics. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. You don't want people thinking you're unstable. There it was, the quiet threat dressed up as concern. I finally replied, not to argue, not to plead, just one sentence. I'm taking space. I'll reach out when I'm ready. It felt like reclaiming oxygen. The backlash didn't stop. It rerouted. Patricia called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was calm, practiced, and somehow worse than yelling. Julia, sweetheart, families say things they don't always mean. Michael was under pressure. You know how men are when they're stressed. You leaving like that created unnecessary drama. We should meet and clear the air. Clear the air, like smoke from a fire I hadn't lit. Gerald didn't bother calling again. Instead, he sent another email, shorter this time. We expect maturity from someone who benefited from our son's success. That was the moment something in me hardened, not in a bitter way, in a resolved way. I forwarded the email to a new folder I labeled documentation, because escalation isn't just emotional, it's informational. Then something unexpected happened. Michael's colleague Diana messaged me. That was brutal. I'm sorry. If you're open to it, I know a sustainable fashion brand looking for a product photographer. Thought of your work. I stared at the message for a long time. Kindness, clean, unqualified kindness, felt unfamiliar coming from that side of the world. I thanked her, asked for the contact. She replied quickly. Also, for what it's worth, half the room thought your exit was the classiest thing they'd ever seen. That message cracked something open. Not grief. Validation. I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't misread the room. I hadn't overreacted. I started therapy the next day. The therapist, Dr. Chen, had a calm voice and eyes that didn't flinch when I explained the spreadsheet, or the joke, or the pressure. When I finished, she said, "Your response was healthy. You set a boundary in real time. That's not dramatic. That's regulated." Regulated. I held on to that word. Meanwhile, Michael kept unraveling. He started sending logistical messages disguised as emergencies. "We need to talk about finances. You can't just disappear. This isn't how adults behave." I noticed something strange. None of his messages asked how I was. Not once. He wasn't confused. He was inconvenienced. And that realization was the final thread pulling loose. I began planning, not emotionally, but practically. I researched cities, studios, cost of living, light quality, creative communities. Places where photography wasn't treated like a personality flaw. I made a list. Good natural light, affordable rent, creative culture, bagels that didn't insult the concept of bread. I chose Boston. Not for symbolism, not for revenge, for the light. I found a loft in an old textile factory. Brick walls, tall windows, space to build something real. The landlord didn't ask why I was moving or who my husband was. He asked if I needed good light and if I was okay with noise from other artists. I signed the lease. That night, I sent Michael one final message. "I've moved out. Please direct any necessary communication through email. No emotion, no invitation, just fact." He didn't respond for 6 hours. Then, "So that's it? You're really doing this?" I didn't answer, because escalation only works if both people keep climbing, and I was already stepping off. By the time moving day arrived, my life looked smaller on the surface. Fewer boxes, fewer obligations, but it felt heavier with intention. I packed my car myself. I didn't ask for help, not because I was proud, but because this part was mine. Boston greeted me with cold air and golden light. The loft was better than the photos. The windows were massive. The walls had history. The floor creaked like it remembered things. I set up my studio before I unpacked my clothes. Tripod first, reflector, camera bag. Oliver immediately claimed the desk. It felt right. That first week, I rebuilt everything Michael had minimized. My website, my pricing, my language. I stopped discounting. I stopped explaining. I stopped apologizing for existing without a title. Clients came, slowly at first, then faster. A candle company cried when they saw their photos. Paid on time, referred others. A coffee roaster said, "This looks like it belongs on a magazine cover." Therapy taught me phrases that changed everything. That doesn't work for me. I need time to consider that. No. Short, clear, non-negotiable. Michael emailed once more. A long one. Structured, reasonable sounding. A proposal for healthy communication. I read it without flinching. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being managed. And that was when I realized something important. The escalation hadn't broken me. It had burned away every illusion I'd been protecting. And what was left was someone I finally recognized. The quiet didn't arrive all at once. It crept in during the moments when I stopped moving. When the boxes were unpacked. When the emails were answered. When the adrenaline that had carried me across state lines finally ran out. That's when it hit. Not like a breakdown, like gravity. I was alone in the loft one night, sitting on the hardwood floor with my back against the brick wall, laptop closed, camera packed away. The city outside the window hummed with life that didn't require me to participate. Oliver slept curled beside my leg, warm and heavy and trusting. And for the first time since the party, I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. What if they were right? Not about my work, not about my worth, but about this. What if I had failed at marriage? I replayed moments I hadn't allowed myself to linger on. The times Michael had reached for me in bed and I'd been too tired from editing. The dinners I'd missed because a client needed revisions. The way I'd brushed off his irritation because I thought love meant patience. Had I missed something? Had I become so focused on proving myself That I forgot how to be a wife? The thoughts were quiet, methodical, dangerous. They didn't accuse. They suggested. That's how doubt works when it's trained. I picked up my phone, scrolled, stopped myself. No messages from Michael. No fresh emails from his parents. The silence felt heavier than the noise ever had. I went to the bathroom, caught my reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, hair pulled back. A woman who looked capable, but worn thin. I did everything right, I said out loud. The words echoed strangely, because the truth was, I had done everything I knew how. But that didn't stop the grief. Grief isn't logical. It doesn't care that you escaped something toxic. It shows up anyway, asking for acknowledgement. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the building settle, my mind drifting backward despite my best efforts. The first apartment Michael and I shared. The cheap couch we bought together. The future we'd planned using words like we and someday. I mourned the version of myself who had believed that love automatically meant safety. The version who thought support would eventually be reciprocated. By morning, the exhaustion felt like a weight pressing me into the mattress. That's when the email came. From the firm. Not a threat, not a negotiation. A reminder. Please confirm availability for the upcoming rebrand pitch. I stared at the screen. My hands shook. This was the moment. I could say no. I could walk away from everything connected to Michael and his world. No one would blame me. I closed the laptop and sat there, frozen. Because suddenly, it wasn't about photography. It was about whether I trusted myself enough to walk into a room that once humiliated me, on my terms. And the doubt came roaring back. What if they're just using you? What if you walk in and they still see you as the joke? What if this is another setup and you don't see it coming this time? I called Dr. Chin, unscheduled. I expected voicemail. She picked up. I don't know if I can do this, I said, voice breaking for the first time in weeks. I thought I was past it, but I'm not. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something, and if I step wrong, I'll lose everything I rebuilt. She didn't rush me. She let the silence stretch. Then she said, Julia, you're not afraid of failing. You're afraid of being dismissed again. The words landed hard because she was right. The humiliation hadn't just hurt. It had trained my nervous system to associate visibility with danger. Whatever you decide, she continued, make sure it's a choice, not a reaction. You don't owe anyone bravery, but you do owe yourself honesty. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. No music, no distractions, just me and the question. Am I walking forward or am I still running? That night, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker on. I pressed my palm to the glass, and for the first time since leaving, I let myself cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to release the weight I'd been carrying alone. When it passed, something else took its place, not confidence. Clarity. I wasn't broken. I was hurt. And hurt doesn't mean stop. It means proceed carefully, with boundaries. I opened my laptop, reread the email, and typed a single sentence in response. I'm available. Please confirm details. I hit send. Then I exhaled, because whatever happened next, it would happen with my eyes open. The moment I hit send, something shifted, not outside of me, inside. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned, like my actions were finally moving in the same direction as my self-respect. I spent the next 4 days building the pitch, not defensively, not angrily, but thoroughly. I didn't mention Michael. I didn't tailor anything to the past. I built the deck the way I'd learned to build everything now. Clear, grounded, undeniable. Mock-ups first. Team portraits that made people look competent and human. No stiff postures. No fluorescent hostage lighting. I designed lighting that softened edges without weakening authority. Office environments that felt intentional instead of intimidating. Warm neutrals. Natural shadows. Spaces that said trust us instead of fear us. I included brand consistency plans, usage rights, delivery timelines, clear pricing, fair, firm, non-apologetic. I didn't over-explain. I didn't undercharge. I priced it like a professional who expected to be taken seriously. The morning of the pitch, I dressed carefully, not for them. For me. Dark jeans, boots, my charcoal blazer, the one that made me stand straighter without trying. Hair simple, makeup minimal. I wanted nothing that could be dismissed as distraction. The meeting was held at a private home office, not the firm itself. That was intentional. I knew it the moment I saw the address. They weren't testing my work. They were testing my composure. When I arrived, Mr. Fitzgerald, a retired founding partner, greeted me with a firm handshake and steady eye contact. Diana was there too. So was Richard Chen, the partner overseeing marketing. Michael was not present. That, more than anything, told me this was real. We sat. I opened my laptop, and I didn't rush. I walked them through my process like this wasn't emotionally loaded, because professionally, it wasn't. I explained how I approach light, how I build trust quickly, how I create images that work across platforms without losing integrity. They asked smart questions. I answered without shrinking. Halfway through, I addressed the unspoken thing. I'm aware my personal history with the firm is complicated, I said calmly. It won't affect my work. If anything, it's reinforced my commitment to clarity, boundaries, and excellence. No apology. No defensiveness. Just truth. Richard smiled. We appreciate the directness, he said. We'd like to see a test series. 5 portraits, 3 office environments, 1 week. I nodded. I'll deliver in 6 days. I shot the test series like my entire future depended on it. Not because I was desperate, but because I was invested. The attorneys I photographed weren't Michael, thank God. I made them look capable without arrogance. Approachable without weakness. I shaped light until rooms felt intentional instead of sterile. I delivered early. When the email came back, I didn't open it immediately. I made tea first, sat down, then clicked. They loved it. The contract attached was real. 6 figures, paid in installments, with a termination clause that protected me. I signed without hesitation. That night, sitting on the floor of my loft, with Oliver batting at the edge of my notebook, I realized something quietly powerful. Michael hadn't taken my confidence. I'd handed it over, piece by piece, because I thought love required it. And now? I wasn't asking for permission to exist in rooms anymore. I was being invited. Not because of him, in spite of him. The next email came 2 weeks later. From Michael. Subject line. Proposed framework for communication. Only a lawyer would phrase it that way. He suggested a meeting, neutral ground, boundaries, civility. 6 months ago, I would have panicked. Now I forwarded it to Dr. Chen. She read it, then looked at me through the screen. How do you feel about meeting him? I thought about it honestly. I'm not scared, I said. And I'm not angry. I think I'm ready to be neutral. That's a position of strength, she said. Just remember, you don't meet him to heal him. You meet him to honor yourself, I replied. Suggested a cafe, a time, terms, no ambushes, no revisiting the past, professional civility only. He agreed. When I closed my laptop, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not closure. Control. I wasn't reclaiming power from him. I was realizing it had always been mine. The meeting with Michael happened on a Thursday afternoon, exactly at 2. I arrived early, not to prepare, but to settle. The cafe was warm, neutral, the kind of place where conversations stayed contained by low music and the soft clatter of cups. I chose a table near the window, ordered tea, and sat with my hands wrapped around the mug until my breathing slowed. Michael arrived on time. He looked different, not worse, just less certain. No power suit, no polished armor, cashmere sweater, dark jeans, an attempt at casual that felt calculated. When he saw me, he hesitated for half a second before smiling. Thanks for meeting me, he said, sitting down. Of course, I replied, calm, even. We talked logistics first. Email boundaries, avoiding overlap at firm events, keeping communication brief and professional. It felt strangely like negotiating a contract between two companies that used to be merged. Then he paused. I want to say, I didn't mean for that night to go the way it did, he said carefully. It got away from me. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. I'm not here to relitigate it, I said. I just want clarity moving forward. He nodded, relieved. Good. That's what I want too. When he mentioned his parents, I stopped him. That doesn't work for me, I said, using the phrase Dr. Chen had drilled into my bones. I'm open to being civil with you because our professional circles overlap. I'm not interested in rebuilding anything with your family. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. That's fair. We finished our drinks, stood, left separately. No fireworks, no apologies, no reconciliation. And that was the point. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It unfolded quietly. The firm's rebrand launched a month later. The photos were everywhere. Website, press materials, social media. The tone was human, modern, confident. My name was in the credits. Not as Michael's ex-wife, as the photographer. People noticed. Word spread, not about the party, but about the work. Michael's reputation shifted in subtler ways. Colleagues stopped laughing at his jokes the same way. People remembered the night, not the punchline, but the silence after it. The way I'd stood, toasted, walked out. Patricia stopped emailing. Gerald never reached out again. Diana did. She sent a note after the rebrand went live. This turned out beautifully. Also, people talk, not the way you think. Just wanted you to know. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The consequences weren't dramatic. They were structural. Michael still had his title, his firm, his career, but something essential had shifted. People no longer saw him as untouchable. They saw him as someone who'd misjudged a moment and revealed more than he intended. Meanwhile, my world expanded. Clients referred clients. The workshop sold out, again. My calendar filled with work that respected my time. I didn't post about the past. I didn't hint. I didn't perform healing. I just built. And that, somehow, spoke louder than anything else. The last time I saw Michael was at a conference 6 months later. We nodded. That was it. No tension, no nostalgia. Just two people who used to share a life and now shared a boundary. I walked out into the city afterward, sunlight cutting between buildings, and felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph. Peace. Because the real fallout wasn't his embarrassment or his parents' silence. It was this. I no longer needed to be understood by people who had already decided I wasn't worth listening to. And that freedom, that was irreversible. A year after the night that split my life in two, I stood backstage at a conference venue, holding a microphone I hadn't earned by association. 300 people filled the room beyond the curtain. Designers, photographers, writers, creatives who knew what it felt like to be talented and doubted at the same time. Someone finished reading my bio. Product photographer, workshop facilitator, advocate for sustainable creative businesses. No footnotes, no explanations. No one else's name attached to mine. When I walked onto that stage, the lights were bright enough that I couldn't see individual faces, and that helped. I spoke the way I'd learned to speak over the past year. Plainly, honestly, without armor. You don't need permission to be valuable, I told them. And if someone introduces you as a punchline, you don't have to become louder or crueler to reclaim the room. You just have to decide, quietly, that your worth isn't up for debate anymore. I told them about leaving a ballroom, about building boundaries instead of arguments, about learning that confidence doesn't come from winning. It comes from choosing yourself without asking for applause. When I finished, they stood, all of them. Later that night, back in my loft, I framed a photo from the event, me on stage, mid-sentence, steady. I wrote underneath it with a black marker, left a ballroom, built a life. Oliver knocked the frame over within 5 minutes. I laughed. Some things never change, but everything else had. I wasn't the woman who waited for rooms to accept her anymore. I wasn't the one shrinking to make ambition comfortable. I wasn't explaining why my work mattered. I knew. And that was enough. The lesson wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about this. When someone tries to make you small in public, you don't owe them a performance. You owe yourself a decision. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is raise your glass, take the last sip, and walk away without asking to be followed.